You know, I wasn't ready. I literally was not ready for the sound of the Technics SU G700 MkII. It's a stereo integrated amplifier. It's a beautiful amplifier, very Japanese looking, very sleek, big power meters. Comes in silver or black, by the way. I prefer the silver. But anyway, before I get into the details of the design, I just do have to talk about the sound a little bit because I was surprised. Anyway, the very first piece of music I played was this one, Jack Johnson by Miles Davis. It's in his electric period, and the music is, pardon me, shockingly electric. And I've used this music on many, many other reviews. I don't usually talk about it because I don't want to repeat myself, but it's kind of my get acquainted music, you might say. So I've heard it a lot, and yet something different was going on here. Miles Davis's trumpet came barreling through. I mean, it was shocking. It was just, it had this power, this immediacy that I never heard before, not like that. And Herbie Hancock's keyboard, again, it's just like crash, bang, boom. It was just, whoa. And this is I'm thinking this is the way this is supposed to be. This is Miles at his most supercharged, right? It's about a boxer. He loved boxing. He was an amateur boxer. But anyway, I'm using my speakers, my reference speakers, Klipsch Cornwall 4s. So I know those. I've heard them on many, many systems, many different sets of electronics driving these speakers. But it didn't sound like this. At first glance, you might think, or I would have thought, this is a Class D amplifier. But it's not. It's not Class D. It's not Class AB. It's not Class A. No, it's a different thing. It's a Technics thing. They call it an all-digital amplifier. And as for the technology that's used inside the box, I am not even going to begin to attempt to describe it. Except when they say all-digital, they mean that the signal, as soon as it's inside the amplifier, is digital, including if you play a record, a vinyl record, upon entry, that analog signal is converted to high-res 192 24-bit digital. It has also 2 line inputs. It has a moving coil, moving magnet input, of course, for turntables, which sounds really good. And then there's 2 line level inputs. And by the way, it doesn't make sense to use an external DAC, an external digital to analog converter with the G700 MkII. Because as soon as the converted to analog by your DAC signal enters the amplifier, it's again converted to digital. So it just doesn't make any sense. So you don't have to use an external DAC. This is essentially the complete package. All you do is add sources and speakers and you're good to go. Which I like. I like that simplicity. I like the meters, by the way, those big meters on the front. And they're real meters with needles bouncing back and forth. Very, very cool. And the way they're lit, it's very sleek, very modern looking, very clean. Oh, there is one little bit of tech that I will mention, and that is what they call load adaptive phase calibration, meaning the amplifier adapts its output to your speakers. It runs test signals to your speakers and adjusts its output to work better with your speakers. Again, how it does all that, I will link to it on their site, but it's there. And it does work because you can turn the load adaptive phase calibration on and off and hear the difference. I'm not saying it's an earth-shattering difference that it creates, but actually I did think it made an improvement, a slight improvement. And I actually did, quote, blind tests by turning it on and off without knowing which one I was in. And whenever I checked, I was almost always listening to it with the phase calibration circuit intact, or engaged, I should say. I'm going to run down the numbers and start with power output. 70 watts per channel into 8 ohms, 140 watts per channel into 4 ohms. The warranty is 3 years, which is certainly above average. The price, I get to the price pretty early in the review, $2,700, and it does come in silver and black. It has a bunch of digital inputs, including 2 coax, 2 optical, USB. Oh, and up front, I was going to forget, it does have a headphone jack, a 6.3 millimeter headphone jack. It has the back panel hosts preamplifier outputs that you could use to hook up a separate power amplifier, or more likely a subwoofer, or two, because it's left and right outputs. The binding posts are particularly beefy and chunky. They feel really solid, can handle really heavy cables with ease. Speaking of heavy, there are bass and treble controls and also mid-range, and they are not knobs on the front panel, they are in menus. But speaking of knobs, you better believe it, knob feel on the G700 Mark II is really excellent, really silky smooth feeling, just like the good old days of Japanese receivers. This one isn't made in Japan, it is made in Malaysia, but designed in Japan. Here are some specs. As for the remote, yeah, it's got one, and it looks sort of generic, but it isn't all plastic. It's metal and plastic. I found it easy enough to use. As for the rest of the system, pretty basic this time. I was using the Klipsch Cornwall 4s and also the Buchardt S400 Mark II stand mount speakers. A big speaker and a little speaker. And the source, well, there were two sources. The turntable was a Technics SL1200G, and the cartridge I used was an Audiophiliac Cadenza Blue, and the CD source was my J's Audio CD Transport. That's pretty much it. As for comparison amplifier, lucky me, I still had the Denon PMA 1700 NE, which is also 70 watts a channel and around the same price, $2,100. Describing sound with words is kind of can be too vague sometimes. But this time, because the amplifier sound is anything but vague, it is so contrasty and defined, and it's very grippy. The bass definition is really, really tight. And I'm thinking this as I'm listening to the Cornwall 4s. I know them so well. They have 15-inch woofers, and the sound was tighter and faster on the bottom than I'm used to. That was the other thing that was jumping out at me when I was playing the Miles Davis Jack Johnson. And the contrast, and it's not really dynamics, it is a sense of contrast that each instrument was standing in bold relief. Each instrument, each vocalist was just like right there. That was so cool. I was so in. And I was saying, this is easy. I wish they were always this easy to talk about. But this time it was. So where do I go to from there? From Miles at his most electric, I went to this Brian Eno box. It's called Installation, Music for Installations. And it is ambient and soft and dreamy and floaty. And the way it filled the room and expanded out, the soundstage dimensions just got bigger and bigger and bigger as Eno's music just wafted around the room. Great stuff. And again, but the little textures, the little details in that music, because it is electronic mostly, yeah, I just heard them all. I just heard them all floating and filling my room. Good stuff. To mix things up a bit, I next played Black Uhuru. It's kind of a pop reggae band, I guess from the 80s. Good record, really good record. And I was playing it through the Denon PMA 1700 NE's analog input, through its phono input. And the sound was bold and juicy and fat. And in ways that I thought, wait, this is different. Because then when I returned to the G700 Mark II, the sound was faster and cleaner and more separation between the instruments. But it was thinner sounding. It wasn't as warm and as rich. It was lighter on its feet. Now, especially in the lowest bass, it just seemed to have more weight coming through the Denon amplifier than the G700. You know, like I was feeling the bass through my feet more through the Denon amplifier than the Technics amplifier. Back on the Denon, I'm playing this Andrew Bird CD. Really good sounding one. They're not all good, but this one is. And the sound of the strings and the vocals, the layered vocals, and even his whistling, it just had this soul to it, this body to it, this warmth that I was getting over the Denon. And when I returned to the Technics, it was still good, and there was more separation, more clarity on the Technics. but I missed some of that warmth, that body that I got from the Denon. Then I played this one, the Ramones Acid Eaters. Now this is an all covers record. There's no original Ramones music on this album, but it doesn't matter because they're so into it. And Joey's vocals are just kicking ass. I mean, there's the fury, but there's also some nuance that I didn't know that he was capable of. And like I said, this is on the G700. And a matter of fact, on one of the tracks on Substitute, which Pete Townsend wrote for The Who, Pete Townsend guests on that record and does backing vocals. And one of the tricks with this song is can you actually hear Pete Townsend singing? Because on some speakers and systems, you can't. You have to, I mean, if you have to listen really hard and you go, oh, there he is. But with this system, this is over the Cornwall Force, by the way. No problem. It was right there. And then I switched over to the Buchardt S400 Mark II speakers. And these are much smaller speakers than the Cornwalls. I have to make some mental adjustment when I make these kind of changes, because when you go from a big speaker with a 15-inch woofer to a little stand mount speaker, comparatively little, they tend to sound small. And indeed, it did sound smaller than the Cornwall. But with the G700 Mark II, that energy, that definition, that clarity, that vibrancy came shining through. Because this speaker is on the warm side anyway, so having a little extra sparkle and shimmer was very welcome over the Buchardt speakers. So if you do want that, if you crave maximum clarity, yeah, I think the Technics SU G700 Mark II is the way to go. It will light up your life. It definitely will, like it did for me. Oh, and I left out the headphones. One of the things that grabbed me about the sound was I was playing these Audeze LCD2 headphones I've had for over 10 years. I've used them a lot. Again, I don't always refer to them, but they can be a little dark sounding, and even though they're open back headphones, the sound can too often sound like it's stuck inside my head. But actually, the G700 opened up the sound. Definitely the soundstage got a lot bigger with these headphones over the G700. So that was, again, that's a really pleasant surprise. All right, we're going to do, so Steve, what do you really think of the Technics SU G700 Mark II? I think this amplifier surprises me. It kept surprising me because of that contrast that it delivers, that excitement, that clarity, that edge definition that I just don't get with other amplifiers. So I'm going through all these changes. I keep listening, I keep playing more music, and I keep coming back to where I began. The G700 Mark II is a very exciting sounding amplifier. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea that it's a bright sounding amplifier. It's not, but it's a very clear sounding amplifier, a very high contrast sound. If you want laid back and mellow, no, this is, if you want a mushy tube sound, this ain't gonna cut it. No, that's not for you. Anyway, that's all I got. I think it's pretty damn cool. And now, speaking of cool, yeah, it is. It is time for the Audiophiliac viewer system of the day. This shot, I like this shot. It spoke to me. Anyway, it comes from Steve. He is in Northamptonshire, England. He runs Qobuz through a Project DS2 digital preamp out to his newly acquired 1970s vintage Technics equalizer. He uses it to cut the bass, so sometimes it gets a bit overwhelming in his room. And he's running the signal from the equalizer to either a pair of quad 2 monoblock amps or the Cora Jupiter 60 watt stereo power amp, depending on the kind of flavor he's looking for from the sound of his Rogers LS7T speakers. Nice. It's either warm and cozy through the quads or excitingly attention-grabbing through the Cora. That's nice to have that option. The headphones are Shure 1840 open backs. Thanks, Steve. All right, we are back. My name is Steve Guttenberg, and I am the Audiophiliac. And you know what? In less than a month, this show will be celebrating its 5th anniversary. And I'm knocked out that this has actually lasted 5 years. And I think, if I do say so myself, it does get better and better. And just on the comments that I get, I think a lot of you feel that way. So it is just massively gratifying to do, to create this thing and keep it going and getting, I really think, better and better. And if you like the videos, please do it for me. Hit the like button when you actually like an episode. I know you're not going to like all of them, but the ones that you like, please hit the like button. And last but not least is, my podcast. And I have to say, the podcast, unlike the YouTube channel, is running out of steam. So it's in a period of figuring out what to do. But it's still there. There's over 20 episodes up on the podcast. And you can listen, if you have yet to do so, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and iHeartRadio and my very own website just for the podcast, which is called Audiophiliac Podcast. So check that out. And with that, I can say, my work here is at last complete. Thank you so much for watching. And I really, really do hope to see you back here again very, very soon. Bye-bye.